Why was she always invisible to them? Why, even after 3 years on base, did the others glance past her like she was just furniture in the hallway? Lieutenant adjusted her glasses, clutching a stack of supply files to her chest as she wove through the morning rush at Fort Carson. Soldiers in pressed uniforms hurried past, boots striking against asphalt, their shouts blending with the thunder of drill sergeants barking cadence at recruits in the distance. She kept her head down, her movements efficient but small, careful not to draw notice. It worked, it always worked. To them she was the clerk, the quiet one, the woman behind the desk who processed training schedules, requisition requests, and personnel files. Reliable, yes, invisible even more so. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that was what she wanted them to think. Had built this life carefully. After years of deployments she no longer cared to count, after nights of sand grinding in her teeth and silence pressing in around her like a coffin, she had chosen this. A quieter post, a desk, a keyboard, and a rhythm she could predict. She told herself it was enough. Most days she even believed it. The office buzzed with the familiar chaos of military paperwork as she slid into her chair. Sarah, the office manager, was juggling 3 phone calls at once, scribbling notes while balancing a mug of coffee that sloshed dangerously close to her paperwork. Tom, their payroll officer, was muttering at a stack of missing, his brow furrowed in permanent irritation. It was normal, ordinary, the kind of ordinary had fought for. She powered up her computer, adjusting the wrist brace she still sometimes wore, though the old injury had healed long ago. Outside, the shouts of drill sergeants rose and fell like a heartbeat across the compound. It was supposed to be a Tuesday like any other. Until the knock came. Lieutenant stepped into the doorway, crisp and stern as always, his voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of ringing phones and clacking keyboards. Conference room B, 10 minutes. Mandatory. General's orders. The office stilled. Phones were lowered, pens stopped moving. Everyone glanced at one another with unspoken questions. Mandatory meetings in Conference B didn't happen without reason. Closed the file she just opened, slipped her glasses off to wipe the lenses with the edge of her sleeve, and followed the stream of office staff down the hall. Inside the conference room, she took her usual place near the back, quiet, out of sight. Until the general walked in. General Harrison filled the room the way only certain men could. 55 years old, decorated, gray-haired but sharp as steel. His gaze swept across the 20 clerks, technicians, and junior officers gathered, as if weighing each one of them with invisible scales. Beside him stood a mountain of a man, drill sergeant, 6'4", built like a wall of muscle, arms crossed, his smirk daring anyone to hold his stare. His reputation had long preceded him. He was the base's combat instructor, known for breaking even the most confident recruits into fragments. Felt the room tighten. "Ladies and," the general began, his voice steady, measured. "Next week we host international observers. They'll be evaluating our readiness. They've requested a demonstration." He let the word hang. Hand-to-hand combat training. Murmurs spread, uneasy glances exchanged. Sat still, her pulse quickening. "The officer scheduled to participate has been hospitalized. Appendicitis." The general's jaw tightened. "We need a volunteer, someone to face sergeant in a controlled combat exercise." The silence was immediate. Even junior officers avoided his eyes. Clerks shifted in their seats. The air thickened with hesitation. Sergeant smirked wider. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like a taunt. "We cannot appear weak before our guests," the general pressed. "This is not gladiatorial combat. It is a controlled demonstration. Safety protocols will be followed, but we need courage, someone willing to step forward." Still silence. Watched the way people looked away, their fear written in the smallest movements, the twitch of a hand, the quick study of ceiling tiles, the nervous scratch of pens against paper. She felt the old stirring in her chest, that long-buried instinct whispering at the edges of her carefully built life. No, she had buried that part of herself. She had chosen to disappear. Yet the general's words cut deeper than she expected. Surely someone here has the backbone to represent this base. Her old commander's voice flickered in memory. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody wants to fight. Her throat tightened. She pressed her hands against the file in front of her, as if the paper could anchor her to the quiet role she had built. But her pulse refused to slow. She could see the general's growing disappointment. She could see smugness expanding by the second, and she could see the international eyes that would soon be judging not just their combat skill but their spirit. The sound came before she realized she had made it. A throat-clearing, small, sharp. The entire room turned. Every gaze landed on her, the quiet clerk in wire-rimmed glasses, hair tied neatly back, uniform pressed but unremarkable. "Sir," she heard her own voice steady, low, and "I volunteer." The silence that followed was thunder. Her colleague stared as if she'd lost her mind. Sarah's lips parted, panic already blooming in her eyes. Tom shook his head slightly, muttering something under his breath. Even the junior officers, who had spent weeks bragging about their training, seemed frozen by the absurdity of it. General Harrison blinked, consulting the roster in his hand. "Lieutenant, Personnel Administration. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." She stood, file still clutched against her chest. Sergeant's smirk shifted into something closer to pity. His voice rumbled low, just audible. "Ma'am, I don't want to hurt you in front of everyone. Maybe think twice." Met his eyes. "I appreciate the concern, Sergeant, but I'll represent this base with honor." The general's brows furrowed. Concern wrestled with relief in his expression. "Very well. The demonstration is scheduled Friday, 1400 hours, 3 days to prepare." And just like that, it was decided. The meeting dissolved into noise. Conversations erupted, whispers cutting across the room like sparks. Felt their eyes clinging to her as she left. Brave, foolish, suicidal. The words weren't spoken aloud, but they were written across their faces. In the hallway, Sergeant caught up with her. His presence towered over her. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, tone softer than expected. "When we're in that ring, I can't fake it. Observers will see through it. I won't go easy. You need to understand." She stopped, turned, and held his gaze. "I wouldn't want you to go easy. Do your best, Sergeant. I'll do mine." For the first time, the smirk vanished. He studied her with the scrutiny of a man who had trained thousands of soldiers, searching for bravado, fear, or the telltale signs of someone in over their head. Instead, he found stillness, a quiet determination that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Finally, he nodded. 3 days, use them wisely." Word spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, the entire base buzzed with one rumor. The quiet clerk, the paper pusher, the invisible woman had volunteered to face. Some called her brave, others reckless. A few called her insane. In the office, Sarah grabbed her arm during a coffee break, whispering urgently, "What were you thinking? Has never lost. He's built to destroy people. You'll get hurt." Tom added, "Withdraw, talk to the general, he'll understand." But only smiled faintly, sipping her coffee with hands steadier than she felt inside. "Sometimes you have to step up when nobody else will." Her words silenced them, but their eyes remained heavy with worry. And when she walked back to her desk, she felt the stares of every passerby, respect from some, pity from others, fear from more than a few. Yet beneath all their gazes, she carried her own secret. One she hadn't told them, not yet. How do you prepare for something you're not supposed to be capable of? That was the question gnawing at as she walked back to her quarters that night. Every step echoed in the stillness of the barracks corridor, louder than it should have, like the sound of boots inside her head. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing with the same energy crawling under her skin. 3 years she had hidden this. 3 years of blending into paper stacks and supply chains, and with one sentence she had torn the mask off. She closed the door to her room, leaning against it for a breath. The silence pressed in, heavy. Her eyes drifted to the duffel bag under her bed, the one she had promised herself she would never unzip again. But promises break. She crouched, tugged it free, and opened it. The scent hit first old canvas, faint oil, leather worn by years of sweat and grit. Inside lay fragments of a life she had buried. Gloves from endless drills, a folded training gi, medals she had never displayed, photographs she could not look at for long. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a faded cloth, the combat knife that had once been an extension of her hand. She touched the hilt with her fingers, then pulled back as though burned. No, that wasn't who she was anymore. And yet hadn't she volunteered? Closed the bag, slid it back under the bed, and sat in the silence. Her pulse was steady, but her mind ran wild. She remembered the words of her old mentor, spoken years ago on a rain-soaked training ground. You can't unlearn what's been carved into bone. You can pretend. You can bury it, but the body remembers. She hated that he had been right. The next morning she tried to sink back into routine. Coffee, files, typing reports with the same mechanical rhythm she'd used for years, but routine couldn't shield her anymore. Every corridor she walked down fell silent as conversations shifted. Every soldier's glance lingered too long. Some gave her nods of respect, subtle but genuine. Others smirked, waiting for the spectacle of her defeat. Most just stared, their eyes heavy with doubt. Sarah cornered her again, holding a stack of papers she wasn't even looking at. Her face was pale, worry etched into every line. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Isn't just strong, he's ruthless. He trains recruits until they break. He's not going to pull punches just because you're you." Set her pen down, folded her hands, and met her friend's gaze. "I understand exactly who he is." Sarah blinked. "Then why aren't you scared?" She almost laughed. "If only you knew." Fear had lived inside her for years. Fear of being sent back into fire. Fear of losing people she couldn't save. Fear of never finding herself again once the deployments ended. This, facing one man in a ring, this was nothing compared to what haunted her every night when the lights went out. But she didn't say that. Instead, she offered the same calm smile she had practiced for years. Because sometimes, Sarah, it's not about winning. It's about showing up. The words silenced her friend. That evening, after the office emptied, left the base quietly. She walked into town, her hood pulled low, her steps carrying her not toward shops or cafes, but to a place she had avoided for years, a small martial arts studio on the edge of Main Street. Through the glass, the place looked unchanged. Wooden floors polished by decades of movement, paper scrolls with characters she couldn't read hanging on the walls, and in the center, standing as though time had not touched him, Master. Her chest tightened. She hadn't seen him in almost 3 years, not since she stopped coming after her discharge. When the door creaked open, he turned. His eyes, sharp and knowing, softened in recognition. "So, the warrior remembers where she left her shadow." Swallowed, "I need to train." He studied her a long moment, then simply nodded. Minutes later, she was on the mat, her boots kicked aside, bare feet remembering the grain of the wood. The first movements felt clumsy, her limbs too slow, her muscles stiff from years of. But muscle memory is a quiet thing, patient, waiting. "Again," Master said. His voice was calm, neither surprised nor judgmental. She moved, a block, a strike, a turn. Her shoulder ached where the old injury had been, but it held. Her breath steadied. "Again." They trained for hours. Sweat darkened her shirt, dripped into her eyes. Every movement scraped rust from bone. Every strike chipped away the clerk she had convinced herself she was. Beneath it, the other self waited, the one who had led teams into black zones, who had walked through fire and silence. When at last she collapsed onto the mat, chest heaving, Master stood over her, expression unreadable. "The body remembers," he said softly. "The question is, do you?" She closed her eyes. Images rushed back. The heat of sand, the weight of a rifle, the echo of orders whispered in the dark, the faces of those who had not come home. Yes, she remembered. Too well. The next day at the office, the stairs felt different. Rumors had spread. Some said she was secretly trained. Some said she had once been special forces. Others dismissed it as fantasy, just wishful thinking to explain the insanity of her volunteering. She let them talk. She kept her head down, typed her reports, nodded at her colleagues. But inside, the rhythm of her body had shifted. Her senses were sharper, her reflexes alive again. The clerk's skin was cracking and the soldier beneath was breathing air again. By Thursday, whispers had turned into murmurs loud enough to reach her ears. People stopped her in hallways. "Is it true you've trained? Why didn't you ever say anything? Do you really think you can take him?" She gave no answers. Mystery was safer, let them wonder. That afternoon, Colonel Winters called her into the same conference room where she had volunteered. The colonel's presence filled the space in a way different from the general. Where Harrison was commanding and blunt, Winters was precise, her intelligence a blade sharper than steel. On the table lay a folder, recognized it instantly. Her own file. The colonel tapped it once with manicured fingers. 8 years special forces, expert marksmanship, hand-to-hand certifications, wounded in action, honorably discharged, and yet you let everyone believe you were just a clerk. The air thickened. His voice was even. "It wasn't relevant to my position." Winters studied her. "Half this base thinks you've lost your mind. The other half thinks you're going to die in that ring. Do you intend to prove them both wrong?" His jaw tightened. "I intend to represent this base." A faint smile touched the colonel's lips. "Good answer, but know this, once you step into that ring, anonymity is over. You can't that bell." The words sank deep, and knew she was right. That night back at the studio, Master said the same thing in different words. "Tomorrow, you stop pretending you are two people. Tomorrow, the world sees the one you've tried to hide." She said nothing. She only kept moving, strike after strike, until sweat blurred her vision and the mat trembled beneath her bare feet. Friday morning dawned bright and sharp. The base pulsed with anticipation. What had begun as a simple demonstration had become something else entirely. Soldiers whispered in mess halls. Junior officers lingered outside the training facility. Even those with no official reason to be there found excuses to drift toward the arena. Walked through it all in silence, her uniform pressed, her boots polished, her glasses catching the sun. People stared, but for once she didn't shrink beneath it. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked quietly, slipping a coffee into her hands. Took a sip, nodded, focused. She didn't tell her what else she felt. Not fear, not dread, something else. Like breathing again. By noon, the training facility was transformed. Mats covered the floor, seats arranged for international observers, medical staff standing by. General Harrison moved with unusual tension, guiding foreign officers to their places, making sure every detail was flawless. At the far end of the mat, Sergeant stretched, his frame filling the room like a calm, confident, deadly. And at the other end, removed her glasses, handed them to Sarah and stepped forward. The whispers rose, then fell into silence. The clerk was gone. What stood there now was something else. Why did the air feel heavier the moment she stepped onto the mat? Every eye in the facility locked onto her. Hundreds of stares pressed down, soldiers, clerks, officers, international observers in crisp uniforms scribbling notes. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, holding their breath. Inhaled slowly, letting the silence settle inside her chest. She stood balanced, hands loose at her sides, boots planted on the mat as if they belonged there. Across from her, Sergeant loomed like a monument. Shoulders broad, arms thick with coiled muscle, his reputation wrapped around him like armor. He looked down at her with something between pity and challenge, as if she were both beneath him and somehow not to be underestimated. General Harrison's voice cut through the quiet. Ladies, and today's demonstration will showcase the practical hand-to-hand combat training we provide here at Fort Carson. These are techniques every soldier must master, regardless of specialty. Sergeant, our senior combat instructor, will be demonstrating with Lieutenant from our administrative staff. The words stirred murmurs. Some chuckled under their breath. Others leaned forward, curious. The foreign observers exchanged glances, pens poised. Felt the shift, doubt, expectation, amusement. She lowered her chin, eyes narrowing, body settling into a posture she hadn't worn in years, ready, alert, balanced. "Ready, Sergeant?" she asked softly. Tilted his head, smirk tugging his lips. "Ready, Lieutenant." The general raised a hand. "Begin." Started with something simple. A controlled grab, the kind of opening move used in demonstrations to showcase defense. His hand shot forward, fast and firm, meant to catch her wrist. But moved. Not with the clumsy shuffle of a clerk pretending to defend herself. Not with hesitation. Her body remembered. She stepped sideways, pivoted on her heel, deflected his grip with fluid precision, and shifted her stance in one seamless motion. Suddenly she wasn't caught, she was at his flank, her hand brushing his elbow, leverage in her favor. Gasps rippled through the room. Blinked, his smirk faltering. He reset quickly, masking surprise. Not bad. The next attack came faster, stronger. A grappling maneuver designed to overpower. He lunged, arms swinging low, aiming to sweep her balance. Met him head-on. Her body dipped, redirected, her legs twisting under his momentum until she was no longer the one being controlled, she was guiding him. For a heartbeat, the sergeant's massive frame wavered off balance. More gasps, more murmurs. Sarah, seated at the front, gripped Tom's arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice breaking with disbelief. Tom only stared, eyes wide. Where the hell did that come from? Didn't hear them. Her world had narrowed. The mat beneath her, before her, breath in her lungs. The rhythm of combat she had buried so deeply, alive again, sharp as ever. Straightened, exhaling hard. The playful smirk was gone now. He circled her, eyes narrowing, recalculating. "You've trained," he muttered under his breath, audible only to her. Said nothing. Silence was its own weapon. He lunged again, faster this time, abandoning the pretense of demonstration. His arm swung in a controlled strike, heavy but precise, meant to show dominance without injury. She caught it, twisted, stepped. And suddenly the sergeant was forced to retreat, his arm nearly locked in a counter he hadn't expected. He tore free, stepping back with a grunt. The crowd erupted in gasps, whispers, a few startled laughs. International observers scribbled furiously, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine intrigue. General Harrison leaned forward, eyes narrowing in astonishment. And she only adjusted her stance, calm, steady, waiting. Exhaled slowly, the sheen of sweat already glistening on his forehead. His voice dropped low again. "You're not who they think you are." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something harder. "Maybe not." He came again, grapple, strike, throw. Each attempt sharper, faster, more complex than the last. He was no longer teaching, he was testing. And she met him at every turn. Her movements were clean, efficient. No wasted motion. No bravado. She flowed like water, redirecting force, using his size against him. A twist here, a sidestep there, every defense shifting into a subtle counter. And for the first time anyone could remember, Drill Sergeant looked unsettled. The facility buzzed louder now. Soldiers stood from their seats. Whispers turned into shouts of disbelief. "Did you see that reversal?" She's actually pushing him back. That's impossible. Sarah's hand covered her mouth. Her heart pounded as if she were in the ring herself. She had worked beside for 3 years, shared coffee, paperwork, quiet lunches, and yet she had never seen this. She didn't recognize the woman on that mat. For the international observers, the demonstration had become something else entirely. They leaned forward, eyes sharp, whispering in their own languages, their pens racing to capture every detail. General Harrison kept his expression measured, but inside, pride surged with something else: unease. What was he witnessing? Who was this woman? Breathing heavier now, wiped sweat from his brow. "All right," he growled, voice pitched low. "No more holding back." He moved with a speed unexpected for his size, launching into a combination he had used to end countless matches. A strike high, a sweep low, followed by a crushing throw designed to leave opponents stunned on the mat. Saw it coming. The world slowed. Her training surfaced crisp and undeniable. She pivoted, blocked the strike, rolled with the sweep, and in one perfect motion reversed the throw. The sergeant's massive frame hit the mat with a heavy thud. For a split second, silence. Then the facility erupted. Cheers, gasps, shouts of disbelief. Soldiers rose to their feet, clapping, hollering. Even the international officers leaned back in their chairs, eyes wide, murmuring in astonishment. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "My God," she dropped him. Tom's jaw hung open. "That's impossible." On the mat, lay staring at the ceiling, chest rising and falling with shock. Slowly, he pushed himself up, eyes locked on her with something entirely new: respect. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Only extended a hand, steady, calm. "Your opponent, Sergeant." He stared at her hand, then took it, pulling himself up. His grip was strong, but hers did not waver. The general stepped forward, addressing the observers. His voice rang with pride. "As you can see, our training prepares every soldier, regardless of role, to hold their own in combat situations." The crowd roared again, but's mind was far from the noise. Her body thrummed with adrenaline, her muscles burned with remembered strength, and her chest ached with something deeper. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had promised herself she would never be this again. She had built walls around it, hidden it beneath files and schedules, but the walls had shattered. And now everyone knew. As she stepped off the mat, the observers buzzing, the soldiers cheering, the sergeant himself still shaking his head in disbelief, felt the weight of every gaze following her. The quiet clerk was gone, and in her place stood someone she had tried so hard to bury. But the truth was out now, and she knew what followed would not be applause. It would be questions and consequences. Why did the silence after applause feel louder than the noise itself? Had felt the roar of the crowd fade behind her as she walked off the mat. Soldiers cheered, officers whispered, the international observers scribbled furiously, their questions multiplying. But as soon as the door closed behind her, as soon as she stepped into the empty hallway, the silence rushed in. She leaned against the cool wall, pressing her palms flat against it, eyes shut. Her heart still hammered, muscles buzzing with the aftershocks of combat. She had faced down fire before, ambushes in deserts, missions no one spoke about after. But this was different. She had revealed herself. And once revealed, there was no turning back. The door swung open behind her. Sergeant stepped through, sweat still clinging to his brow, his massive frame filling the narrow space. For the first time since she had known him, his voice carried no arrogance, no smirk, only raw curiosity. "You're not just some clerk," he said quietly. Didn't look at him. "I never said I was." He studied her, arms folded. That wasn't basic training out there. That was advanced, special forces level. She finally met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "Sometimes people aren't what they appear to be, Sergeant." He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Fair enough, but you should know you just set fire to the rumor mill. You won't be invisible anymore. She almost smiled at the irony. Invisible, the thing she had worked so hard to become. Maybe it's time, she murmured. He tilted his head, studying her as though trying to decide if she was a threat or an ally. Finally, he nodded once. You've earned my respect, but prepare yourself. The brass won't let this slide. With that, he walked off, leaving her alone again in the empty hallway. By the time she returned to the administrative office, the storm had already begun. Every desk had stopped working. Every eye turned toward her. Conversations hushed, whispers cut mid-sentence. Sarah's face lit with both relief and confusion, Tom's jaw still slack as if he had seen a ghost. Sarah began, voice trembling. I don't even know what to say. That what you did. Tom cut in. That wasn't luck. That wasn't courage. That was training, real training. You've been lying to us this whole time. The words stung sharper than she expected. Not because they weren't true, but because they carried disappointment. She lowered her gaze, set her glasses back on her nose, and said softly, I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. Sarah's eyes searched her face. Why? Because I couldn't, thought. Because I needed to be someone else. Because if I remembered too much, I'd drown in it. But all she said aloud was, because it wasn't relevant here. The office sat in heavy silence, torn between awe and unease. And then the knock came again. This time it was Colonel Winters. Her presence filled the small office like a shadow. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Lieutenant, she said, with me. Rose without protest. The colonel led her not to a briefing room but to a private office she had never been inside before. Its walls were lined with books, citations, photographs of missions spanning decades. A map stretched across the far wall, dotted with colored pins marking places recognized all too well. On the desk lay a folder, thick, familiar. Her file. Winters gestured to the chair opposite her. Sit. Obeyed. The colonel opened the folder, flipping through pages with clinical precision. 8 years, special forces, multiple commendations, expert in hand-to-hand combat, injured in action, discharged with honor. And yet, you let this entire base think you were just another desk officer. Her tone carried neither accusation nor admiration, only fact. Clasped her hands in her lap steady. I wanted a quieter post. Winters raised an eyebrow. Wanted or needed? Said nothing. The colonel leaned back, studying her with piercing eyes. You realize you've made things complicated. The observers were impressed, yes. The general is already fielding questions. They want to know how our administrative staff are trained like special forces operators. They want to know how many more clerks we have who could take down instructors twice their size. A faint smile tugged at her lips. I take it that's not what they expected. No, Winters said sharply. And it puts us in a difficult position. You've revealed a capability they can't explain, and now we have to decide how to handle you. The words settled like lead. Handle her, not trust her, not honor her, handle her. Straightened, forcing her voice to stay calm. I did what was asked. I represented the base. I didn't embarrass anyone. No, Winters admitted. You did more than that. You stunned them, but now comes the fallout. Once a mask slips, Lieutenant, it doesn't go back on. Lowered her gaze. She already knew that truth better than anyone. The colonel closed the file with finality. The general will want to speak with you Monday. Be prepared to answer questions you've avoided for years. With that, the meeting was over. Left the office feeling the weight of invisible chains. She had walked into the ring to protect the base's pride, but in doing so, she had lost her own anonymity. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at her small desk, staring at her reflection in the darkened window, glasses perched on her nose, uniform neatly pressed, the image of a quiet clerk. But she knew better. The woman staring back at her wasn't just a clerk. She wasn't just an officer behind a desk. She was the other one, the one she had buried under reports and requisitions, the one who had resurfaced the moment's hand reached for her wrist. And now that part of her was awake again. She whispered into the silence as if confessing to herself, "You can't unlearn it. You can't undo it." The next morning, the base was different. Conversations paused when she entered the mess hall. Salutes lingered longer than before. Even soldiers who had never spoken to her nodded in quiet respect. Some looked at her with admiration, others with suspicion, and a few with fear. By noon, she realized she had become a story. Recruits whispered that she had knocked unconscious with a single strike. Others swore she had thrown him across the mat like a rag doll. The truth twisted, exaggerated, retold. And with each telling, her anonymity shrank further. Sarah approached her during break, coffee in hand, her voice low. "Do you hear what they're saying about you? They're making you into something else. A legend." Exhaled, rubbing her temples. "Legends are just lies that grow roots." "But there's truth in it," Sarah pressed. "We've all seen it now. You can't go back to being invisible." Wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because Sarah was right. By Friday afternoon, a week after the demonstration, the summons came again. This time, it wasn't just the colonel. General Harrison was there, and beside him, two unfamiliar officers with special operations insignia. The air was thick before a word was spoken. "Lieutenant," the general began, his tone softer than usual. "We need to have a serious conversation about your past and about your future." The words pulled at her chest, heavy and inevitable. Because deep down she knew. This wasn't about one demonstration anymore. It was about what came next. Why did the walk to the general's office feel longer than any march she had ever done in combat boots? The corridor stretched endlessly, each step echoing, each breath. Had walked into ambushes with less dread than this. Out there she had trusted her training, trusted her team. But this was different. This wasn't a firefight. It was a reckoning. She reached the door, knocked once. "Enter," came the voice. General Harrison sat behind a polished oak desk, his posture stiff, eyes sharper than usual. Beside him, Colonel Winters stood with her arms crossed, her gaze steady, clinical. And flanking them, two men in darker uniforms, unfamiliar faces. Their insignia marked them as Special Operations Command. The room smelled faintly of coffee and leather-bound files, heavy with history, heavy with judgment. "Lieutenant," the general said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit." She did, back straight, hands folded, heart steady, though every nerve in her body screamed to run. The general spoke first. "Your demonstration last week has created complications. The international observers were impressed, very impressed, too impressed." His eyes narrowed. "They're asking questions. Questions about how someone in an administrative role could dismantle my best instructor on the mat. Questions I don't have simple answers to." Remain silent. Colonel Winters stepped in. "We pulled your full file, your service record is clear, special forces, commendations, hand-to-hand certifications beyond advanced, wounded in action, honorably discharged, you've been hiding in plain sight." The words cut deep, though she had expected them. "I wasn't hiding," she said finally, voice low. "I was surviving." The two unfamiliar officers exchanged glances. One leaned forward, introducing himself with a clipped tone. "Colonel Martinez, Special Operations Command. This is Major." His voice carried the weight of someone used to giving orders no one refused. "You understand, Lieutenant, that what you displayed cannot be ignored. Your skills are too valuable. We need people like you again." Again. The word landed like a stone in her gut. Her jaw tightened. "I left for a reason." Martinez's eyes sharpened. "Your injury, it's healed, isn't it? From what we saw on that mat, you're more than capable." It wasn't just the injury, replied, her voice steady but brittle at the edges. It was everything. The toll, the missions, the weight of decisions you can't take back. I didn't leave because I couldn't fight. I left because I couldn't keep living in that fight. The room stilled. Even Harrison seemed to soften just slightly. But Martinez pressed on. With respect, Lieutenant, our country doesn't always give us the luxury of walking away. You know what's out there. You know what we face. Men and women like you are rare. We can't afford to lose you to supply requisitions. Her chest burned. She wanted to stand, to shout, to tell them they had no idea what it cost her to keep breathing after the missions they'd sent her on. But she stayed still. Colonel Winters broke the silence. No one is asking you to return to the exact same operations. There are training positions, advisory roles, strategic planning. Your expertise could prepare others without putting you back in harm's way. Shook her head slowly. And what then? Every day I train someone else to fight, I'll see the faces of the ones I couldn't save. Every strategy I write will carry ghosts. Do you know what it's like to carry names you can't say out loud because they never made it home? The words trembled in the air. No one answered. General Harrison leaned forward, his voice softer than before. We're not trying to break you, but the truth is simple. You can't put the warrior back in the box. You proved that when you stepped onto that mat. You think you've buried it, but it's still there, alive, breathing, waiting. She closed her eyes for a moment. His words echoed the same thing Master had told her, and she hated that they were right. Because she had felt it too. The moment reached for her wrist, the moment her body moved without thought, she had felt alive. Alive in a way she hadn't in years. And that scared her more than anything. Major finally spoke, his voice measured. We're not here to force you, but we need an answer. Will you consider returning in any capacity to serve beyond the desk? Opened her eyes, steadying her breath. I need time. The general nodded. You have 1 week. After that, we'll need your decision. The meeting ended. She walked out into the sunlight, but it felt dimmer, colder. The air pressed heavy on her chest. Around her, soldiers moved briskly, their lives unshaken, but hers was unraveling. That evening, she found herself back at Master's studio. The smell of sweat and wood greeted her like an old friend. You've spoken to them, he said, not as a question but as fact. She nodded. They want me back. And what do you want? The question cut deeper than any blade. She sank onto the mat, her shoulders slumping. I don't know anymore. I thought I wanted peace. I thought I wanted quiet. But when I stepped into that ring, I felt it all again. The rhythm, the clarity, the purpose. And I don't know if that's strength returning or an old wound reopening. Studied her silently, then crouched beside her. Peace is not the absence of the warrior. Peace is knowing when to let her speak and when to let her rest. His words lingered. She trained with him that night, movements sharper, faster, her body remembering more with each strike. Sweat poured, muscles burned, but her mind felt sharper than it had in years. Afterward, lying on the mat, chest heaving, she whispered, If I go back, I'll lose myself again. Shook his head. No, if you go back without knowing who you are now, you will lose yourself. But if you carry both, the clerk and the warrior, you may finally become whole. The next days blurred. Whispers grew louder around the base. Rumors spread, twisting into legends. Some swore she had trained under secret masters. Others claimed she was part of Black Ops missions no one could confirm. Soldiers she'd never spoken to stopped her in hallways, asking for advice, training tips, stories she refused to tell. Even her office was different. Sarah looked at her with something between admiration and distance. Tom spoke carefully, as though she might explode. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced with reverence she never wanted. It hurt. She had wanted invisibility, and now she was untouchable, not in strength but in distance. By Thursday, she realized the truth. No matter what she decided, her old life was already gone. On Friday morning, she sat at her desk staring at a blank page. The words wouldn't come. Reports meant nothing now. Files, requisitions, schedules, all of it blurred. Because deep down she knew. She would have to choose. When the week ended, she requested another meeting with the general. This time she walked in without fear, without hesitation. She stood before them, Harrison Winters Martinez, and spoke clearly. "I'll return, but not as who I was before. I won't vanish into the field again. I won't drown in missions until there's nothing left of me. I'll serve as trainer, as advisor, as strategist, and I'll keep my post here part-time. I'll live both lives, not just one, because I can't bury myself anymore. Not the clerk, not the soldier." The room was silent. Then Harrison leaned back, a rare smile softening his face. "That's an answer I can live with." Martinez and exchanged glances, then nodded. Winter's lips curved faintly, approval in her eyes. And in that moment, felt something she hadn't in years. Not relief, not victory. Wholeness. But even as the decision settled, she knew this was only the beginning. Because once the world had seen what she was capable of, it would not stop asking. And the question waiting in the shadows was one she hadn't yet faced. What happens when she's asked to go further than she promised? Why did the uniform feel heavier when she put it on Monday morning? It wasn't the fabric, not the weight of the boots or the cut of the jacket. It was the insignia stitched on the sleeve, the one newly added after her meeting with command. It marked her as something different now, not just administration, not just special forces past, something hybrid, something in between. Studied her reflection in the barracks mirror. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who had blended behind piles of files. And she wasn't the soldier she once was, either. She was something she didn't yet know how to name. The base would name it for her soon enough. When she walked into the administrative office, the air shifted. It wasn't the usual morning chaos of ringing phones, misplaced and Sarah juggling coffee while balancing schedules. People straightened in their chairs. Conversations faltered. Sarah tried to smile as she handed her usual coffee, but even that felt different, more formal, more careful. "Morning," she said softly, almost like a salute. Tom muttered something like "ma'am," and quickly looked away. Set the coffee on her desk and lowered into her chair, her stomach sinking. This was what she feared, not the bruises of combat, not the scars that never faded, the distance, the way people no longer saw her as one of them. By midday, it became worse. Soldiers she had never spoken to hovered in doorways, pretending to need signatures but really just starring. Others approached directly, asking for training tips, recounting rumors they'd heard. "Is it true you flipped with one hand? I heard you disarmed him blindfolded. My squad swears you trained with shadow units. Is that true?" She deflected with calm, practiced words. "No, exaggerations, just training like anyone else." But no one believed her. By Thursday, her name had become legend, not the quiet clerk, but the one who dropped. And legends, she knew, had a price. The first week of her new assignment began that afternoon. At 1300 hours, she stepped out of the office and crossed to the training facility. The air there was different, sharp, with sweat, barked orders, the rhythm of boots slamming mats. Sergeant was waiting, arms crossed, smirk returned. But it wasn't the same smirk. This one held respect. "Lieutenant," he said with a nod. "Sergeant," she replied, matching his tone. The recruit stared openly, whispers swirling as she walked to the center mat. They expected a spectacle. Instead, what they got was structure. She began with fundamentals, footwork, breathing, balance, the things too many overlooked, the things that had saved her life more times than weapons ever had. "Don't fight the force," she told them, her voice carrying across the room. "Redirect it, flow around it, win by not being where they expect you to be." Her movements were clean, efficient, stripped of flash. And yet the recruits watched with wide eyes, scribbling notes, practicing each motion like it was gold. Watch 2, at first with skepticism, then, as minutes turned into hours, with a growing respect he didn't bother to hide. When the session ended, recruits swarmed her with questions, some eager, some reverent, and walked out of the facility with something stirring in her chest. Not adrenaline, not pride, something quieter, purpose. But with it came danger, because purpose was the very thing she had feared. Purpose had dragged her into missions she still carried in her bones. Purpose had nearly broken her before. That night she sat at her desk alone, the base quiet outside her window. Her pen hovered over paperwork she hadn't touched in hours. Her mind ran in circles. Could she really balance both worlds? Could she really be the clerk and the soldier? Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, "You okay?" She typed back, "Yes, just tired." It was a lie. What she didn't type was the truth. She wasn't tired. She was alive again, and that terrified her. The weeks blurred. Each morning at her desk, she processed requisitions. Each afternoon on the mats, she trained recruits, advised officers, even sparred with seasoned soldiers who wanted to test themselves against her. None lasted long. The respect grew, but so did the distance. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Jokes no longer included her. She was no longer their colleague. She was the legend. Sarah tried to bridge the gap, brought her coffee, asked about her training sessions, sat beside her at lunch. But even she seemed hesitant, as though unsure whether to speak to the clerk she had known or the warrior she had discovered. One evening Sarah finally asked, her voice low, "Why didn't you tell me? All those years, coffee breaks, late nights at the office. I thought we were friends." Looked at her, heart heavy. "We are, but I needed to be someone else then. I needed quiet." Sarah's eyes softened, but the wound lingered. It was a fracture, didn't know how to mend. By the end of the month, pressure came again. Colonel Winters summoned her, this time not to question but to inform. "Your training sessions have caught attention," the colonel said, sliding a file across her desk. "Other bases are asking about your methods. Special Operations Command wants to expand your program. They want you on a larger stage." Stared at the file. Inside were requests, schedules, outlines. "You told me I could serve in both roles," said slowly. "Clerk and trainer, balance." "And you are," Winters replied evenly. "But balance shifts. The more you give, the more they'll ask. You knew this would happen." His throat tightened. "And if I say no?" Winters leaned back, her eyes unreadable. "Then you'll still be a legend on this base. But legends don't stay contained forever. Word spreads. Doors open. You can walk through them or they'll be opened for you." The warning was clear. That night trained alone at Master's studio. Strike after strike, sweat blurring her vision, muscles screaming. Finally she dropped to her knees, chest heaving, whispering into the empty air, "I can't go back. I can't lose myself again." But the silence answered with the truth she didn't want to hear. She already was. The clerk was fatting. The warrior was breathing. And the world was watching. Why did the applause always feel like chains? Stood at the edge of the training mats, recruits surrounding her, their faces flushed from exertion, their voices raised in claps and cheers. She had just finished demonstrating a series of disarms, simple yet effective, the kind that left even seasoned fighters blinking in disbelief. The recruits adored her. They whispered her name like a story told in barracks at night, the one who dropped, the one who could outthink and outmaneuver anyone. But behind their admiration felt the weight. Every cheer bound her to a role she hadn't asked for. Every clap dragged her further from the quiet life she had built. The applause faded, the recruits dispersed, and she stood alone in the echo. That afternoon, Colonel Winters called her in again. The colonel's office felt colder than usual, blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. A file sat on the desk, thicker than the last. Winters tapped it once with her finger. Your program is gaining traction, she said, her voice clipped, efficient. Command wants to expand it. Requests are coming in from other bases. They want you to travel, to teach, to advise. Stared at the file without touching it. That's not what I agreed to. You agreed to serve in both roles, Winters countered. Balance, you said, but balance shifts. Opportunities grow. The truth is, Lieutenant, you've become an asset too valuable to keep here. His jaw clenched. I'm not a tool. Winters' gaze softened for the first time. I know, but the system doesn't see people, it sees capabilities, and you've reminded them what you're capable of. The colonel's words lingered long after left the office. That night she walked the perimeter of the base alone. The air was sharp, the stars scattered above like cold fire. She remembered other nights under different skies, desert, jungle, mountain. Nights where silence wasn't safety, but the pause before gunfire. She whispered into the dark, I said I wouldn't go back. But the silence gave her no comfort. The next morning, Sarah stopped by her desk, coffee in hand. She sat down across from her, eyes searching. You're pulling away, Sarah said quietly. Looked up startled, I'm right here. No, you're somewhere else. Sarah's voice trembled. Ever since the demonstration, it's like you're slipping through my fingers. I don't know who I'm talking to anymore. My friend or this legend everyone whispers about. His throat tightened. She wanted to say she was still the same, that she was still the woman who shared late-night jokes about broken printers and misplaced files, but the words wouldn't come. Because Sarah was right. She wasn't the same. She forced a smile anyway. I'm still me. Sarah didn't look convinced. She sipped her coffee, eyes glistening, then stood. I just hope you know which you're fighting for. The words cut deeper than any blade. By the following week, things escalated. Was summoned again, not by Winters this time, but by General Harrison himself. His office was crowded with men in darker uniforms, insignia marking them from various commands. Maps spread across the table, red markers stabbed into regions recognized instantly. Conflict zones. Her stomach dropped. Lieutenant, Harrison said, his tone grave. Your training program has caught international attention. Our allies are requesting demonstrations. Some want you to advise on joint operations. Special Operations Command believes you could fill gaps. Gaps, she asked cautiously. Unstable regions, missions requiring discretion, operators who can teach on the ground while providing backup if needed. Her chest tightened. You said I wouldn't be sent back into the field. Harrison's gaze didn't waver. I said we wouldn't ask you to return to what broke you. This is different, training in theater, advisory roles, but yes, there may be risks. We can't ignore your value. The room blurred, her pulse hammered. She forced herself to speak steady, calm. I agreed to balance, office and training, not this. Colonel Martinez, seated at the table, leaned forward. With respect, Lieutenant, balance is a luxury. Soldiers out there don't have it. They need someone like you, and you know it. His words dug deep because they were true. She did know it. She had seen soldiers break because they hadn't been taught properly, hadn't been guided, hadn't had the tools she now carried. And she remembered the faces, too many faces. The meeting ended without her answer. That night she drove into town, headlights cutting through empty streets, until she pulled up outside Master's studio. Inside, the old man waited as if he had known she would come. They want you back, he said simply. She nodded, sinking to the mat. Advisory, training, but in the field, it's not what I agreed to. Studied her silently, then asked, what are you afraid of? Her breath caught, losing myself again, becoming the ghost I was before. He crouched before her, his voice soft but sharp. And what if refusing means others become ghosts instead? What if the only way to honor the ones you lost is to keep others from joining them? Her eyes burned. She hated him for being right. For hours she trained, strikes, counters, rolls, her body moving with a precision she hadn't lost. Every motion whispered the same truth: she still belonged here. But when the session ended, and the silence of the empty studio closed around her, she whispered, "I don't know who I'll be if I say yes." The following days blurred with pressure. Soldiers asking when she'd start training at other bases. Officers hinting at her being tapped for higher responsibilities. Even Sarah avoided the subject now, though her silence said enough: she was afraid would disappear entirely. By Friday, a week after the meeting, stood at her desk staring at her reflection in the dark screen of her computer. Glasses perched on her nose, papers stacked neatly. She looked like the clerk again. But inside she knew the truth. That mask was cracking. The phone rang, startling her. She picked it up. General Harrison's voice came through, steady and low. "Lieutenant, we need your answer." Her hand tightened around the receiver. Her heart hammered. Outside the window, soldiers marched in cadence, their voices rising in unison. She remembered when that sound had been her heartbeat, when every step, every shout, every mission had carried her forward. And she remembered the silence that followed, the silence of loss. Her throat closed. She forced the words out anyway. "I need more time." Harrison was silent for a moment. Then, "Time runs out, make peace with that." The line clicked dead. She lowered the phone, staring at it as if it had burned her hand. And for the first time since stepping onto that mat against, fear flooded her chest. Not of combat, not of missions. Fear of herself. Because deep down, she knew what her answer would be. And she wasn't sure which part of her, the clerk or the warrior, would survive it. Why do choices always arrive in silence? The week had ended. The phone call had come, and still hadn't given an answer. She walked the base that morning with a calm exterior, but inside, her thoughts twisted like storm clouds. Every face she passed reminded her of the weight on her shoulders. Recruits sparring in the courtyard, shouting with laughter and sweat. Officers rushing between offices, arms full of reports. Even Sarah, crossing the hallway with a folder clutched to her chest, avoiding eyes. The world was moving forward, but she stood still. In her office, she opened her drawer and pulled out a photograph she hadn't looked at in years. A team, dusty and grinning in desert sunlight. Her old unit, some faces still alive, others' names carved on walls she had visited in silence. Her thumb brushed across the photo. The memory was sharp, alive, laughter on nights when the weight of the world seemed too much, voices trading jokes, hands steady in firefights. And then silence, the kind that never left. Her chest tightened. The knock came. She didn't look up. "Come in." Colonel Winters stepped inside, her presence as precise as always. She closed the door softly, studied for a long moment, then spoke in her measured voice. "They want their answer today." Set the photo down, her hand lingering on it. "And if I say no?" Winters didn't flinch. "Then you'll stay here. You'll keep training recruits, keep the legend alive. But you'll watch as others go unprepared into things you could have prevented. And you'll carry that too." Her throat tightened. "And if I say yes?" "Then you go back into the fire. Not as who you were, but as who you've become. Half soldier, half teacher. You'll shape lives, save lives, but you'll lose the quiet you built here." Silence stretched between them. Winter's voice softened just barely. "It isn't about what the army wants anymore. It's about what you can live with." And then she left, closing the door gently behind her. The office felt smaller, heavier. Stared at the photograph again, at the ghost smiling back at her, and she whispered, "I don't know how to carry both." But the truth hit her even as she spoke it. She already was. That afternoon she drove back into town, back to Master's studio. The old man was sweeping the floor, his movements slow, deliberate. "You've come for your answer," he said, not looking up. Stood in the doorway, the weight of her choice pressing down. What if I say yes and lose myself? What if I say no and live with guilt? Leaned on the broom, eyes sharp. Then you must stop asking what you will lose and ask instead what you will give. The words rooted in her chest. She trained one last time that evening, every movement a meditation. Punches flowing into blocks, blocks into counters, counters into stillness. By the end, her body shook, drenched with sweat, but her mind was clear. She bowed to her teacher, "Thank you." Only nodded. The next morning she stood once more outside General Harrison's office. The door loomed, the weight of decision pressing like stone. She knocked. "Enter." Inside, Harrison sat behind his desk. Winters stood at his side. Martinez and were there too, their eyes steady, expectant. Stepped forward, her voice calm. "I'll go." The words hung in the air, steady, final. Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing not with triumph but respect. "You understand the cost?" "Yes." "And you accept it?" Her chest rose steady. "I do, but on my terms. I won't vanish again. I won't drown in missions until there's nothing left. I'll serve as trainer, advisor, soldier when needed. But I'll return here too. I'll carry both lives because I have to." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Winters inclined her head, the faintest hint of approval in her eyes. "Very well," Harrison said. "Prepare yourself. Deployment briefings begin next week." It was done. Left the office into the sunlight. The air felt sharper, alive. Sarah was waiting near the courtyard, clutching a folder, eyes uncertain. She stepped forward as approached, her voice hesitant. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Stopped for a long moment. She couldn't speak. Then she nodded. "Yes, but I'll come back, I promise." Sarah's eyes shimmered, torn between pride and hurt. "I don't want you to come back as a ghost." The words hit like a strike, reached out, resting a hand lightly on her friend's shoulder. "Then hold me to it." For the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled, faint but real. That night packed. Not much: uniforms, boots, a small journal, the photograph of her old unit folded carefully into her bag. She paused, staring at it, whispering into the dark, "This time I'll carry you with me, not as ghosts, as reminders." Sleep didn't come easy, but for the first time in years she didn't fear the morning. The days that followed moved quickly. Briefings, simulations, maps spread across tables with red markers stabbing foreign soil. She listened, advised, taught, demonstrating techniques with recruits and veterans alike. And when the day came, she stood at the edge of the airstrip, duffel slung over her shoulder, wind tearing at her uniform. Planes rumbled in the distance. Soldiers marched past in lines, their faces a mix of fear and determination. Breath deep, the air tasted of jet fuel and dust. She wasn't the clerk anymore, and she wasn't the soldier she once had been. She was both. The engines roared, the call came, and she stepped forward. No speeches, no grand farewell, just quiet steps into the fire she had chosen. Because sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't beg for recognition. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.